Tonight, the Prime Minister says sorry, but is this the moment that the Conservative election campaign fell apart?
I think he lets the country down.
On reflection, that was a mistake, and I apologise.
Rishi Sunak suffers a D-Day backlash from veterans and senior Conservatives. Reform leader Nigel Farage tells this programme that the Prime Minister is unpatriotic. Also tonight, disunited one of the country's biggest unions refuses to sign off Labour's manifesto. And we're shaking up our own election coverage here on The Hub. Who gets the Swiftie vote?
If you were to sum up the general election with a Taylor song, a Taylor lyric, well, what would it be for you?
Karma! Karma all the way. Karma.
On the dance floor with us tonight, Mercy Muroki and Tom Hamilton, who'll be with me for the next hour. It's Friday, I'm Ali Fortescue, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Feels like a day that we might well look back on as a defining moment in this election campaign, and a photo that I suspect will come to haunt the Prime Minister. David Cameron in a lineup of world leaders remembering the fallen, while Rishi Sunak sat down for an election interview. Campaigns can unravel because of a series of unfortunate events. An opponent can carefully unpick policy flaws, or sometimes an unforced error can come to define an election, a lapse of judgment. The Prime Minister has apologised for leaving D-Day early, but you've got to ask the question, how did the people around Rishi Sunak miss this? Today, one of his own advisers, Ian Ackerson, has quit the Conservative Party. He said it had been outsourced to, as he put it, a bunch of mendacious, incompetent and disreputable clowns. And the Prime Minister himself says his diary was drawn up well in advance. Unlike gaffes of elections past, this one, it seems, was planned. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, with tonight's first report.
This, the Prime Minister walking out on the nation's veterans, departing early from events commemorating the 80th anniversary of D-Day, rushing back to the UK to record a TV campaign interview, leaving the Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron to stand with the world leaders instead. And, in the middle of an election campaign, the leader of the opposition too. This, now a question of judgment.
Can you explain why yesterday you prioritised a campaign TV interview over the opportunity to commemorate those who gave everything for our country in June 1944? You left early. What were you thinking?
Over the past 2 days, I've participated in a number of events in Portsmouth and France to honour those who risked their lives to defend our freedom and our values 80 years ago. The itinerary for these events was set weeks ago, before the start of the general election campaign, and having participated in all the British events with British veterans, I returned home before the International Leaders event later in the day. On reflection, that was a mistake, and I apologise. I think it's important, though, given the enormity of the sacrifice made, that we don't politicise this.
It's men like Ken Hay the Prime Minister chose to leave behind. He was just 18 when he landed on the beaches of Normandy. He was later captured, forced to work in a Polish coal mine, and subjected to the infamous 1,000-mile-long march. His anger is not political.
I think he lets the country down. What are we doing? We bail out, let them get on with it. Because I want to stand in the election, I want my seat back. How soon will long before they forget? Are we a 5-minute wonder? It'll all be forgotten next week, I don't know.
Ken Hay, a 98-year-old D-Day veteran, told us that you let the country down. Is he right?
I participated in events both in Portsmouth and in France over 2 days because this is an incredibly important moment for our country to commemorate the sacrifice of all of those and their service. And it was a real honour and a privilege to meet many veterans and speak to them and their families, hear their stories, express my gratitude to them and build on our record of making sure that this is the best country in the world for veterans.
Prime Minister, you didn't care, did you?
No, I cared deeply.
Then why didn't you stay?
As I said, the itinerary for these events was set weeks ago, before the general election campaign.
You feel no shame at all?
As I said, on reflection, it was a mistake not to stay longer, and I've apologised for that. But I also don't think it's right to be political in the midst of D-Day commemorations. The focus should rightly be on the veterans and their service and sacrifice for our country.
It's the veterans who are saying that you're letting the country down. Are they politicising this?
Now, I've apologised for not staying longer. On reflection, that was a mistake.
A difficult exchange with a PM in crisis. There is real fury from his own side. One candidate told me this shows the PM doesn't understand patriotism. Another said this is the biggest moment of the campaign so far.
Could the campaign get any worse, Prime Minister? That's the Prime Minister leaving after a very tense interview. Veterans are upset. His candidates are furious. And to the question of, well, can it get worse? There's no answer at the moment.
Ministers can't defend this.
Undoubtedly, veterans will feel pretty raw over this, and I don't dispute that, and I totally understand. And personally, it's a bit crushing, yes, but it is what it is, and it's happened.
This man's return was already panicking Conservative candidates. Their problems may have just got even worse.
He is completely disconnected from the centre of this country, and he's proved to me that he basically is not a patriotic leader of the Conservative Party.
So we have to keep going, do we?
On a day like today, a question he could be forgiven for asking, learning lessons the hard way. At a school located on Veterans Way. His problems follow him down every road.
Well, Sam's here, and it's a big day when Sam, who's not meant to be in today, comes in. I mean, this feels like a significant moment, and you were with the PM. What was his demeanour like?
I mean, he was incredibly tense. And a lot of people have picked up on the robotic tone that he adopted. It felt like somebody who didn't quite know which levers to pull in the face of a torrent of criticism for something I suspect he wasn't even quite sure why there was so much anger around. When Boris Johnson was called out by my colleague Beth Rigby after Partygate, Boris Johnson was sorry. I'm not sure Rishi Sunak was that sorry, judging by the tone and the person that stood in front of me earlier today. And I think that's contributing to the Tory worry about where this goes next.
Fascinating stuff, Sam. Thanks so much. And we will be hearing more about politicians' apologies later in the show. Well, the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage, has accused the Prime Minister of being unpatriotic. I spoke to him a little earlier. Firstly, your reaction to the Prime Minister missing the end of the D-Day anniversary?
It's appalling, and it shows the man doesn't understand. He's not basically patriotic. He doesn't care about our history, frankly, our culture. D-Day was an amazing operation between the Americans, Canadians and us. It was the beginning of the liberation of Europe. It was done at huge sacrifice. There are still people alive that were there, and they were back on those beaches. It's the last time they'll ever be there. But that didn't matter to the Prime Minister. No, getting back to do an interview seemed to take a higher priority. And it shows just how disconnected this Prime Minister is. And that's a big problem, because the one thing you've always associated the Conservatives with is being a patriotic party. Well, it's now got an unpatriotic leader.
Is it as much about the people around the Prime Minister advising him as it is about him himself?
Oh, I'm sure that he was given bad advice, but he is supposed to be a national leader in tune with where the nation is. And I promise you something. D-Day is something the people of this nation are immensely proud of, and rightly so. This was an occasion on a national and international scale to pay homage, particularly to those few survivors that we have left. He doesn't understand that. I was there, but I was there in a personal capacity with friends. I raised money for a charity, a lot of money to get veterans out there. And honestly, I think I'm much more closely attuned to where the country than he is.
You were there, but in this campaign you've said that some young Muslims don't share British values. Would you like to pay tribute to the 1 million Muslims who served in the British Army during the Second World War?
It's far bigger than that. Actually, 40% of the entire contribution that we made, that we had in 2 world wars, 40% came from what we now call the Commonwealth. So there were people right across the world, and by the way, they were all volunteers. None of them were pressed to do it. So I fully understand that history. The problem that I'm talking about is a separate problem of 18 to 24-year-old young Muslims who were born in this country, who increasingly are being radicalised.
Do you understand why people have found those comments uncomfortable, to say the least? Why it has been, taken on by people, you say you're not racist, but it has been used by people who are racist to fuel their arguments?
I'm not interested in those people, and thank goodness in this country they are a tiny minority fringe. All I'm doing is stating an obvious truth that makes people in Britain feel very, very uncomfortable. Why? And I don't know the answer. Why are young British-born Muslims being attracted to jihad and radicalism? And if we don't talk about it, we've no chance of dealing with it.
I'm going to ask you one more question quickly on D-Day. President Biden and Macron both use this as an opportunity to stress the importance of more support for Ukraine. You once spoke of your admiration for Vladimir Putin.
No, I didn't.
You said he was an operator, as you put it.
Well, that's not admiration, is it? So let's get this right. I said he was.
Do you still think?
I said he was an unpleasant human being. I wouldn't want to spend time with him, but he was a very clever political operator. Let's get the context right, shall we?
And can I ask, do you think that you're more charismatic than Richard Tice?
Oh, goodness gracious me, that's not for me to judge.
Do you? Go on.
I don't know. I've no idea, but I am more charismatic than Starmer and Sunak. Of that, I have no doubt at all.
How do you take the news that you were bigfooting him this week?
Look, he'd been urging me to do this for the last few months. I was the one that was reluctant.
Well, let's get a quick reaction from my guests, former government advisor Mercy Muroki and Labour policy advisor Tom Hamilton. Mercy, let's start with you. Do you think this has been overblown, or do you think this is really going to be a defining moment?
I don't think it's a defining moment, but it was certainly a very bad look, and it was clearly ill-advised. And I'm not sure him saying, this has been the itinerary for weeks is helping his case, because if he's known he was leaving early for weeks, then, perhaps he had enough time to do something about it. So, I don't think you can condone it at all. He's clearly apologised, and that's obviously the line they're going to use. But I don't quite buy that he's unpatriotic. I've never seen anything from Rishi Sunak as a person which suggests that he somehow hates this country or doesn't appreciate Britain. He comes from an immigrant background, and he's spoken quite passionately before, actually, about how much he values Britain. So it's, bad optics, I think, but I wouldn't agree that he's unpatriotic.
I mean, this is a gift for Labour, isn't it?
I mean, it is. And I, by the way, I wouldn't question his patriotism either, but I would question his judgment in not staying for the whole event. And I don't really understand why he wouldn't have wanted to stay for the whole event. And you can say he's badly advised, but it's he's in charge, and he should have been overruling his advisors and saying, I want to stay for this whole event. I want to be at the same place as the other world leaders, because this is a really important thing. It's a gift for Labour in the sense that their opponent has made an appalling error of judgment. But really, Labour's not part of this story. This is about the Prime Minister making a catastrophic mistake.
OK, thank you both. We'll come back to you very shortly. Well, listening to that is the Conservative grandee and former SAS reservist, David Davis. He joins us from the spin room at tonight's seven-way TV debate. Now, we've got to ask you about the Prime Minister's decision over D-Day. How would you describe the morale in Tory ranks today?
Well, in my ranks, in my constituency, they're fine. I mean, they understand it's a mistake, not a deliberate decision, a mistake. He apologised for it straight away. And as one of your, I don't know who you're speaking to, but one of the people you're talking to said, well, in fact, they both did. He's a very patriotic man. He's a very hard-working man. He's a Prime Minister in the middle of a general election. I can tell you what that's like. It's absolutely frenetic, going from one thing to another. And you don't always look at, well, you don't typically look at your diary to see what the next thing is and the next thing. You don't manage that. Somebody else does it for you. So, it was a mistake, and that's that. And look, understand something else. I mean, I went, as you pointed in my reserve service, I went to the 65th anniversary because I thought, a lot of people would die after that. They're about 85 years old, most of them at that point, and so a large number will be there. And when I went initially, Gordon Brown wasn't going. He only went when Obama said he was going to go. So, and he was putting the international thing ahead of the veterans. I didn't criticise him for that. I didn't attack him. I didn't politicise it. That was just the fact of the matter. This is a mistake, and he's apologised properly, and that's the end of it.
OK, well, Keir Starmer did find the time to go. I'm just going to read you a couple of messages from backbench Conservatives, and these are not necessarily your kind of usual rebels. One described the Prime Minister's behaviour as just wrong. Another says he's surrounded by idiots. I know that election campaigns, as you say, are frantic. But do you understand the strength of feeling, why people feel so strongly about this?
Well, some do. I mean, I think everybody would have preferred that he stayed. But the simple truth is, I'm not picking up the sort of strength of feeling you're talking about. I'm picking up people being sad about it. They want to pay proper respect to these people who made such sacrifices to protect our freedom to have the discussion we're having now, our free speech and our civilization, and we want to pay proper respect to that. Remember, the Prime Minister went to all the British events first. He met all the veterans, or saw all the veterans, and, as I say, paid his respect to them, as he properly should have done.
So are you saying you think basically it's been overblown?
Look, don't put words in my mouth. I've actually said what I've said. It was a mistake. Well, I don't answer questions where you say, is it this or is it that? It's simply a mistake, an unfortunate mistake, and he's apologised for it.
OK, I'm going to just quote from a 98-year-old veteran who said that Sunak let the country down today. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't. I can understand people being raw and sore, as Johnny Mercer said earlier, but I'm afraid it was an error that he shouldn't have made, and that's that. But he apologised very, very quickly. I think he realised, as both of your colleagues there said, he's a patriot. He's hardworking. He really believes in respecting what these people have done for our country. The Americans call them the greatest generation. I think that's not a bad phrase to talk about them. They made many of their comrades made the ultimate sacrifice. And that's why I went those years ago and why I've been since. It's something that we should always respect, and I think the Prime Minister does respect that as much as anybody you've ever met.
OK, when the Prime Minister was Chancellor, you once described him as someone that had no strategy. You said he's making the economy worse to deal with the cost of living crisis. You backed Penny Mordaunt against him to be the Prime Minister of this country. Do you think she'd be doing a better job right now?
That issue's not in play. I mean, what's in play at the moment is what happens after this election. The people watching your programme will be thinking about what the future holds for them and how they should vote to deliver on that. And what we're offering is a stable economy. The growth forecasts are good. The inflation has come down. Cost of living coming back under control. I can remember a time when inflation getting above 10% was a disaster, which is very difficult to deal with. Even Margaret Thatcher's brilliant government couldn't get it down below 10%. He's got it from 11 down to 2 and a bit in a few months. That's a remarkable achievement against the Ukraine war going on. He's doing. We've got our growth rates better than most others in Europe. Our exports are going well. Our inward investment for technology is better than Germany and France put together. I think actually the Treasury record has been pretty good given the crises that we've faced. Now against that, you've got to look at, what will Labour do? Well, the Guardian was saying yesterday they've got 12. Already decided tax increases that they're going to announce in September. Why didn't they tell us about that? Why don't they actually explain? If they say the £2,000+ per person is wrong, well, what is the right number? How are they going to fund what they're proposing, which is at least 38 billion and probably considerably more? Those are the questions that we need to be dealing with. That's the issue that faces the people of this country.
OK, David Davis, unfortunately that's all we've got time for, but thank you very much from the spin room there ahead of that Sunway debate. You're watching the Politics Hub coming up. Politicians who apologise. We all remember Nick Clegg's famous sorry, but is today's apology from Rishi Sunak going to be enough? Disunited, one of the country's biggest unions, refuses to sign off Labour's manifesto. Edinburgh erupts in Swiftie mania as the biggest star in the world brings her era's tour to the city. We ask some Swifties what they make of the election.
Museum of Homelessness is a new kind of museum. It's been set up and is run by people with experience of homelessness. So it's sort of the answer that you get when you ask people who are homeless what a museum should do. So we do everything a normal museum might do, exhibitions, events and things like that. We also take direct community action and we campaign independently on behalf of people who are homeless.
Well, I think there's so much urgency around homelessness, right? And I think, where do you get your news about homelessness? I suppose you might look at a Christmas appeal or read the press, and I think people have a lot of burning questions. And so the museum, I think, answers that by giving people a feeling, an experience. You know, when you go to a museum, you often don't really remember the label, but you remember the kind of thing that you kind of set your eyes on and you really reflected on and you kind of engaged with. So we're trying to bring that feeling out as well from people. So people want to, like, they have questions, but they also want to connect really with something. And I think over the last 10 years, we've learned that could be a very powerful way for people to engage with homelessness. So when people come to the Museum of Homelessness, they're not getting a traditional museum experience at all.
We'd like people to know that people who are homeless are not victims. And actually, within the homeless community lies solutions and creative solutions to a lot of the problems that society is facing at the moment. So our opening exhibition, which the community has designed, is a 90-minute experience which is called How to Survive the Apocalypse. And we're inviting the public to come and to hear stories of homelessness that you won't hear anywhere else, and maybe to find some of the solutions to some of the things that society is facing today. People can expect to hear object stories from our collection, connect with people who are experiencing homelessness in a way that you won't find anywhere else in the UK. People can expect an authentic experience and, as I said earlier, finding some of those answers to some of the stuff that's going on in society that we need to fix.
Well, one of the country's biggest unions, Unite, has refused to endorse Labour's manifesto. Members of the shadow cabinet were tight-lipped at a meeting on their way in and out of the meeting.
Give a workers-friendly manifesto.
It's a boring manifesto, very cautious. Is this a centrist manifesto? Is this a manifesto for winning? How is it?
Very good.
Any ding-dongs in there?
Positive, it's going to be the manifesto that changes Britain.
Any rows? Any disagreements?
Well, Sky's political correspondent Tamara Cohen was the person you could hear there asking the questions. She's with me now. Tamara, Unite not backing the manifesto, how big a moment is that?
So I tried to get them to tell me what had gone on in the room where 80 of Labour's top brass, the shadow cabinet, the union bosses, various other officials sit down, they put their phones in a cupboard and they go through the manifesto line by line and then sign it off. Now, after 4 hours holed up in that building, Labour officials said to us, it has been endorsed, hooray. But it turns out that Unite, which is the second biggest union, it has over 1 million members, it is the biggest donor to the Labour Party, they have not endorsed it because they are very concerned about what it says about workers' rights. This has been quite a big battle between Labour and the unions. Labour say that they are making some big commitments to workers' rights in this manifesto that Angela Rayner, the deputy leader, has been working on. But the wording on 2 of the key areas, one of them is about Labour's commitment to banning new oil and gas licences. Now, Unite are concerned that all those oil and gas workers are going to lose their jobs, and when green energy takes over, there may not be any equivalent jobs. They say that the reassurances they were looking for there were not in there, and also I understand that they are concerned about some of the language on firing people and rehiring them on worse conditions. So when the members in the room were asked, do you endorse the manifesto? People clapped. Unite did not endorse that. Could potentially play quite badly for Labour in Scotland, where these oil and gas jobs are, and the SNP have been very critical. And also it raises the question of whether the boss, Sharon Graham, silent today, will say something next week.
Thanks so much, Tamara. We're going to come back to you, and we're going to put some of that first to Lisa Nandy, who's Labour's Shadow Minister for International Development. She's also in the spin room ahead of tonight's 7-way TV debate. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. First, I want to ask you about D-Day. I mean, the Prime Minister has apologised for leaving early. Does that mean we can draw a line under this?
Well, look, I mean, it was never our argument. It's a choice that the Prime Minister made. He's got to live with and account for his choices. But for Keir Starmer, as he said this morning, it wasn't a choice. There was only one choice, and that was to be there to pay respects and to spend the appropriate amount of time showing that we honour people who served our country, and crucially that we'll continue to honour them in the way that we treat veterans in our country in the future.
When it comes to policy and defence more broadly, Labour won't commit, though, to a time frame for raising defence spending to 2.5%. Have you not got questions to answer on that, then, if you're not giving a time frame?
Look, we've been absolutely crystal clear that the general public have had enough of politicians who make big promises from this Conservative government and then just don't keep them, have no intention of keeping them, have no idea how they're going to fund them. That's what we've seen on defence spending from the Conservative government, and we've seen it on a whole host of other areas as well. We know what happens when you crash the economy. It's working people across this country who pay the price. We're absolutely committed to the nation's defence and security. Our commitment to NATO is unshakable. We're committed to the nuclear deterrent, and we're committed to supporting our armed forces. But when we set out our plan for how we're going to keep the nation safe and fund our armed forces, you can be sure that we'll keep that promise, because every single word of it will be fully costed and we'll deliver it.
OK, on Labour's policies, big day, obviously, for your manifesto being rubber-stamped. How was that meeting today?
It was very positive, and those of you who follow Labour politics will know that these things aren't always very cohesive and positive, but I can honestly say, after 14 years as an elected politician, that this was a really, really positive and constructive meeting. I think we all went away from that meeting feeling that there is a plan that we can put before the British people that will help to deal with the broken promises of the last 14 years and give people confidence
when Unite
that
refused
although we
to
can't do
endorse
everything overnight, we can start to turn things around.
Sorry, can I just jump in?
Well, look, I spoke to Sharon. Sure.
How can it be positive when Unite have refused to... Sorry, these are the dangers of these down-the-line interviews. How can it be positive when Unite have refused to endorse it?
Yeah, well, I spoke to Sharon Graham at the meeting. It was a constructive meeting. I think everybody would agree, including Unite, that there's lots in the manifesto that we can honestly all say, hand on heart, will transform the prospects for working people in this country. Obviously, these are always things that we debate in the room. We have that debate, we put forward different views, but we agreed that manifesto, and there was a resounding yes when that was put to the room. And I am really confident that this is a plan that not only will inspire people to come out and vote for change at the general election, but something that we can say to people after all these years of broken promises, all this chaos and division, we can set Britain back on the right path and we can deliver every single thing that's written down in that document.
But Unite didn't agree to it, and it's in part because of your plans to ban oil and gas licences in the North Sea. There is still a tension here with unions, isn't there?
I wouldn't describe it as a tension. I'd describe it as a constructive discussion. And as Ed Miliband, who is the Shadow Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, made absolutely clear, he represents Doncaster, I'm from Wigan. We know what a bad transition looks like, and we have no intention of allowing that to happen again. In the 1980s, when the coal mines were closed, people in places like Wigan and Doncaster are still paying a very heavy price for how that was managed. Our plan sets out how we're going to create new jobs so that we can safeguard those workers to work in the industries of the future. As fossil fuels are being phased out, we've got to get on the front foot and make sure that we create those jobs so that a whole generation of young people across this country can power us through the next century like their parents and grandparents powered us through the last, through clean energy, through good, well-paid jobs that help to sustain local economies and keep people's bills low. That's the plan that we put together that's in our manifesto, and I'm really proud of it, and I'm confident that it will make an enormous difference to those workers in the North Sea oil and gas industry.
OK, it sounds like you're going to be recognising Palestinian statehood in your manifesto, but as part of a peace process. Is that right?
Yeah, so that's been our long-standing position. Keir Starmer set it out last year, and it remains our position that Palestinian statehood is not a gift to be given, it's a right to be realised, and must be realised as part of a process towards a two-state solution, not as an outcome of it. I think that's crucially important. You can't have meaningful negotiations between two different parties if you don't recognise that one of them exists, and so you will see some words on that in the manifesto, as Jonathan Ashworth set out earlier today.
So that's not immediately, it's not like in Spain or in Ireland or what Jeremy Corbyn previously promised?
Well, we believe that this has far more impact if you work in step with your allies as part of a meaningful peace process. We know that for many Palestinians, the words two-state solution, the idea of a meaningful peace process, have just not been real for the last decade and a half. And we're determined that if we are fortunate enough to win the trust of people to govern on July the 4th, that will usher in a new era where our generation will not walk away from the Palestinian people. We will work tirelessly in order to achieve a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable Palestinian state and give real meaning to those words. And recognising Palestinian statehood will be an important part of that process, and we'll work with our international partners to bring as many people along with us as possible.
OK, Lisa Nandy there from the spin room at that seven-way debate that's happening later this evening. Thanks so much for speaking to us.
Thank you.
Tamara, what did you make of that?
So she said it was very positive in there. And look, compared to these meetings during the Jeremy Corbyn years, lots of shouting, lots of falling out, look, I think to a great extent it was. And a lot of people were very pleased with Labour's manifesto. I understand it didn't contain any spending surprises, very cautious, a lot of focus on economic security and national security. So there was a lot that they agreed on, including that the unions agreed on. So in that sense, it is a victory for Keir Starmer. But look, it's going to be published next week. This is what they're pinning all their hopes on, that will be the election-winning manifesto that will give people on the doorstep something to understand that Labour will do in government. But I think there's a question about now whether the unions will go public with their opposition to some of those proposals and what impact that has. There could be implications for the party's campaign in Scotland. I asked Keir Starmer about this issue last Friday, and he was adamant that the jobs in Scotland in the oil industry would be safe. But of course, having a battle with the unions isn't always a bad thing for a Labour leader who wants to show that the party's changed. OK, Tamara, thanks so much. We haven't heard anything from Unite this evening, but let's see if we hear something from them over the coming days. Coming up next on the Politics Hub, as the Taylor Swift Eras tour comes to the UK, we're asking Swifties what they think of the election.
Welcome back. You're watching the Politics Hub on Sky News. The top stories. Rishi Sunak has apologised for leaving the D-Day commemorations early to record a TV interview, calling it a mistake. Labour accused the Prime Minister of putting party ahead of country and dismissed Rishi Sunak's apology as politically motivated. And a poll has found that 65% of people believe the Prime Minister's decision to leave the D-Day commemorations before they ended was unacceptable. You can stay up to date with all the goings-on in Westminster on our digital politics hub by scanning the QR code at the bottom of your screen. Among the other stories we've been covering that you can read about today, Labour have met with unions and officials and finalised its election manifesto. Pledges include promises on workers' rights and recognising Palestinian statehood. Unite the Union, though, has refused to sign off the manifesto. And Labour grandee Harriet Harman joins Beth Rigby and Ruth Davidson as the first Friday sub for Jess Phillips in the Electoral Dysfunction podcast. Scan the QR code on your screen to listen to the latest episode and follow wherever you get your podcasts. Plus, remember, you can get a head start on every day of the election with our essential political podcast, Politics at Jack and Sam's. It's going out every single weekday through the campaign to bring a short burst of everything you need to know about the day ahead. All that and much more, just scan the QR code on the bottom of your screen. Right, now Rishi Sunak is not the first party leader to say sorry, is he? We heard that today. I mean, do you think, we'll bring back in our panel, I should say, Mercy and Tom. Do you think sorry is ever enough, Mercy?
I mean, I think in this case, I don't think there's anybody who's going to come out and defend the fact that he left. So, of course, he's had to apologise, and I'm sure people will welcome the apology, but, you know, it's a mistake that shouldn't really have been made in the first place. I think the optics are very terrible, to be honest, and as somebody mentioned earlier, this is perhaps one of the last celebrations where there will maybe be anybody who was actually who is a veteran who actually took part. So this was the one where he really needed to show up, and given the level of scrutiny he's currently under, I think it was a mistake. But look, he's apologised, and I think the news cycle moves very fast, and we probably won't be talking about this in a few days.
And I think before we ask you, Tom, we can have a little reminder of some of previous political apologies past.
There's no easy way to say this. We made a pledge, we didn't stick to it, and for that I am sorry.
Deeply sorry for misjudgments that were made. I just repeat, I deeply sorry.
There was a misunderstanding and she's accepted my apology. If you like, I'm a penitent sinner.
So, Tom, we had Nick Clegg, Gordon Brown, Boris Johnson in the middle. Did any of those apologies work?
Well, no, in that all of them lost their jobs fairly shortly after they made those apologies. I remember sitting as a fairly junior staffer in Labour HQ on the day that Gordon Brown made that apology, and when he was picked up on mic calling Gillian Duffy a bigoted woman, which was clearly not something he should have done, and which slightly derailed the campaign.
I'm not defending it, but it was unplanned.
Yeah,
unlike
absolutely, it was unplanned.
Day.
It was something that he didn't intend to be public. Whereas whatever else you want to say about Rishi Sunak, not turning up to the D-Day celebrations or not staying to the end of the D-Day celebrations is very much a planned thing. I mean, some folks were saying earlier that he didn't feel like it was a very sincere apology. I don't want to speculate on how sincere it was, but it wasn't a very. It didn't sound particularly heartfelt, and he said at the same time as apologising that he didn't want to politicise it, almost as if he was blaming the people who are criticising him for making a party political issue of it. In the end, they are not doing that. They're just really angry, and he came back in order to give a party political interview criticising the Labour Party when he could have been with the other world leaders at Omaha Beach. So I think it's not unreasonable for people to be quite upset, to be quite quite critical, and to demand that the apology is a bit deeper than, using the same form of words twice to try and get through an interview.
And we should talk about Labour. This has overshadowed, really, the Labour manifesto launch, well, not launch, rubber stamping exercise today. The expectation is it's going to be quite a short manifesto. Mercy, do you expect any surprises?
I don't think so necessarily. I think Keir Starmer is probably going to play it safe because, if the polls are to be believed, they're heading for a massive landslide. So, at this point, I don't think it's necessarily in his interest to, start releasing any huge commitments that will be scrutinised and, people inevitably ask the questions about how he's going to cost this. So I can understand why he's playing it safe. But then there is the other side of, if people are going to elect Labour, they kind of want to know what they're electing Labour for, because at the moment, it does just feel like the polls are the way they are just because people don't want the Conservatives. But, people will actually want to vote for Labour to get something in return. And I haven't seen anything from Labour that gives, anybody a really compelling reason to vote for them.
What do you think?
Well, I think Labour set out quite a lot of policy over the last year or so. I think we do know, broadly speaking, what the manifesto will be in, and, nobody expects surprises. That's why they're surprises. But I think we probably do know roughly what it's going to say. But I think, this is an election where the Tories are trying to run on we've got a plan and Labour hasn't got a plan. The problem for them is that Labour has been setting out its plans in quite a lot of detail over the last few months. The company I work for, Public First, did some polling this week that said that voters associate having a plan with the Labour Party and having no plan with the Conservative Party at the moment, despite the fact that that's what the Tories' slogan is. So, we'll have to wait and see what the manifesto says. Maybe there will be surprises that I'm not and you're not anticipating, but I think there will be enough in it to give the Labour Party, if it wins the election, a governing agenda that will last it the next 5 years.
Interesting. And I think we've got a picture we can show you. This is going back to the subject of election gaffes, if you like. Here it is. Either of you get who this is?
Absolutely.
Yes, of course. Michael Foot in what became known as his donkey jacket. At the Cenotaph in 1981. This it's sort of got echoes of what we've seen today, hasn't it?
Say what you like about Michael Foot. He turned up. He was there doing his job, and people criticised the way he was dressed, but they didn't criticise him for being absent. And I think that's why this decision by Rishi Sunak is so damaging, because you've got pictures of D-Day celebrations without the Prime Minister of the UK, one of the key participants in the D-Day landings.
Mercy, how important are these moments? I think particularly when it comes to the Cenotaph and D-Day, people feel very strongly.
Yeah, absolutely. And, despite what many people like to say, I think the vast majority of people are incredibly patriotic about this country and are incredibly grateful and eternally grateful for all the sacrifices, the veterans who are still alive and everybody who died in the World War. Everybody's incredibly grateful to those people, and I don't believe the narrative for one second that the Prime Minister is in some way unpatriotic, or he doesn't quite understand the gravity of D-Day celebrations, or the gravity of why we celebrate people who fought for us in the war. So look, he's obviously apologised, he's obviously sorry, it's a mistake, and it's one I hope future leaders perhaps won't repeat after this.
Someone said to me today they thought it was the worst election campaign since Foot lost the landslide in 1983. Do you think that's fair?
Well, it's hard to think of a worse one, although, I guess the proof of the pudding will be in the actual, to mangle a metaphor, will be in the actual result of the election. We'll see how many seats he gets.
What do you think, Mercy? Do you think would you describe it as a good campaign from the Conservatives right now?
Well, look, it's been a week of gaffes, clearly. But I think the fact a couple of days ago we were talking about, is the Prime Minister a liar, which is, quite a significant, issue if the man who wants to lead us is a liar. And now we've moved on just a couple of days later to this. So this is why I think, in a couple of days, we probably won't be talking about this. We'll probably be talking about something else entirely. So I don't think it's something that's necessarily going to keep the Prime Minister up at night over the next couple of days.
He's managed to move the agenda on from is he a liar to does he respect our heroes? So I'm not sure which is worse, really.
And still lots of time to go. I think we're still in the first half of the election campaign. I can't keep up. Anyway, We're all exhausted already here. Still to come on the Politics Hub, politicians could only dream of the devotion Swifties feel for their icon Taylor Swift. As her Eras tour comes to Edinburgh tonight, we will get some Swifties to give their hot takes on the election. Welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, this programme sometimes needs shaking up. Taylor Swift, the biggest star on the planet, is in Edinburgh tonight with the kind of pulling power that Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer can only dream of. So who's got the Swiftie vote? Well, we've been out to find out. Let's bring in Mercy and Tom, who did not expect to be asked about this. Are either of you Swifties?
I have a 5-year-old daughter, so I may not be a Swiftie myself, but I'm not wholly unfamiliar with her work.
What about you, Mercy?
Well, I might be expected to be because I'm of that generation that's supposedly into Taylor Swift. She's not my kind of music, but like Tom, I have a daughter as well, a young daughter, and sadly, because she listens to Taylor Swift, she puts the Taylor Swift songs on my Spotify. So now my Spotify algorithm thinks I want to listen to Taylor Swift.
And have your daughters got strong political views as well, like these Swifties?
No, frankly.
I would hope not.
What you heard there was someone praising Ed Davey. I mean, do you think this campaign has needed a bit more light relief? Do you think those sort of stunts are cutting through?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ed Davey's clearly he's living his best life at the moment and quite enjoying himself, and you know, it's providing a bit of light relief, and it's better to fall off a paddleboard,
yeah.
Go down the slip and slide. You know, it's certainly something worth missing the D-Day celebrations for, I guess.
Yeah, and Mercy, what do you think?
I've never heard anybody be so enthusiastic about Ed Davey, to be honest. I was quite surprised at her enthusiasm. But you know what? I think credit to Ed Davey. He's showing his human side. I think he's been the leader that has shown a human side more than perhaps any of the others. And I actually think Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak could do with showing a bit more lightness to them. They do come across as a bit stiff and stale sometimes. So maybe they could learn something or two from Ed.
Much love from the Swifties, were they? Yeah, what do you think they could do to perhaps attract this sort of audience, this sort of love?
I mean, in the end, it is not the job of politicians to enthuse stadiums full of people. It is their job to, run the country. And if people aren't that enthusiastic, if people are more excited to see Taylor Swift than they are to see Keir Starmer, I think that's fine for both of them.
And on a more serious note, as we sort of reach the end of the week, Mercy, what have been your highlights and lowlights of this week?
Well, it seems like there's really only been lowlights. Really, I can't think of a single thing I've been pleased to hear about from the politicians. I think what I am looking forward to, I will say, is the manifesto is actually coming out, because so far it feels like there's just been a lot of tit for tat, and I don't think many people are necessarily enthused about the debate. That's the 7-way debate necessarily. Clearly, the 2-way debate was a bit of a shambles, to be honest. Yeah, it could, but I think once the manifestos come out, I think that's when we should really actually judge what the parties are going to do for us. So I'm looking forward to actually talking about the substance of what politicians are, or what the leaders and the parties, what they're offering the country. I think that's what really matters.
Yeah, Tom, it feels like next week is very important.
Next week is a big week because, the manifestos come out. And, I mean, some important things have happened this week. We've had the TV debates, which I'm not a big fan of TV debates, but, they happen.
Do you think they can shift the dial?
No. I mean, only they shift the dial if someone makes a massive mistake. And to be fair to both of the leaders, they didn't make a massive mistake on the day. I think Rishi Sunak's made a massive mistake subsequently, which may well be the most important event so far of the campaign. But yeah, the manifestos, you're quite right, are going to be more important because that will define where the year goes. And
I should very quickly remind viewers that we have our own debate next Wednesday, the 12th, I believe, where both Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer will be talking to us, so you can't forget that. Mercy, I mean, we should also mention there is a 7-way TV debate that I think is happening right now. these are always quite difficult, aren't they? Because there's so many people trying to get a word in, and when it's 7 people, you actually don't get very much time, do you?
Yeah, and it was difficult enough, really, chairing the debate, I think, between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. And, you know, I'm not sure these sorts of formats work, really, when it's, you know, 3, 4, 5, you know, 7 people, because it is, at that point, just about political point scoring as quickly as you can. So you're just trying to get in that very quick, snappy statement that will target your opponents. And actually, I think the public tend to see through that kind of thing. And I think the public have a lot more time these days for long-form sort of conversations with politicians and, you know, holding politicians to account in a way that allows them to properly explain what it is they actually intend to do. So I'm not necessarily a huge fan, but I'm sure that the Sky News one will be the best one of all, of course.
Of course. And Nigel Farage is going to be involved this evening, Angela Rayner. So there are a few quite fiery figures. I mean, on Nigel Farage, some of the polling suggests they are within a whisker of the Conservatives. Obviously, things change as you actually get to polling day. But how concerned do you think the Tories should be, and Labour? Because it does seem like they might take some votes from Labour as well.
They should both be concerned. I think the Tories should be more concerned because they are aiming their campaign at precisely the same votes that Reform are aiming for, and the fact that Nigel Farage is present is really damaging. The other thing to remember is that at the last election, the Reform Party's predecessor, the Brexit Party, was standing in Labour-held seats but wasn't standing in Tory seats. So a rise in the Reform Party vote hits the Tories a lot harder because they are coming from a base of 0 in so many of the seats that Labour actually is trying to take. So it is a really, really dangerous development for the Tories, and you know they're right to be scared about it. It could be a cruel summer for them.
And Mercy, I mean, the other big thing that happened this week was, of course, Nigel Farage changing his mind, deciding he is going to stand.
Yeah.
How significant is that?
I think it's quite significant because I think this is the closest he's probably come to actually being able to win a seat, and perhaps we might have Nigel Farage on the back benches in a few weeks' time. So that is significant in that way because it's obviously a huge political voice, and regardless of how strongly some of his views are and how controversial his views are, he does represent the sentiment of so many people across the country. Having said that, Reform as a party are clearly not going to have major influence. They're going to win 1 seat perhaps. I think YouGov have predicted the maximum they could win is 4 seats. So, given the numbers, I don't think they're necessarily going to have massive impact in terms of sort of policy. But Nigel Farage as an individual and as a political figure certainly always does make his mark.
You've got to feel for Richard Tice in those pictures there. He's been big-footed quite swiftly, hasn't he?
Well, that's what happens when your party is literally owned by someone who can come in and be the leader of it.
I did ask Nigel Farage about that earlier. Yeah. I asked him, is he more charismatic than Richard Tice? He had a twinkle in his eye, but he said, that's for you to judge. Right, I think that's basically all we've got time for this evening. Thank you so much, both of you, Mercy and Tom, for speaking to us. I'm glad we've got to speak to you a lot this evening. You will see me tomorrow at 7 because now I am doing Friday, Saturday and Sunday. We are going 7 days a week on the Politics Hub here on Sky News. Sophie, of course, at the helm Monday to Thursday, and there are not that many days left to go, but we are still at the beginning of this long election campaign.